All right, welcome everybody to the Information Technology and Interoperability Tech Dive webinar for June 2020. So this month I had a scheme where I was going to do a series of kind of lightning talks on tools that folks have found useful while quarantined in our current situation. Didn't get the response I'd hoped for that, so maybe we'll keep that idea in the back pocket for another time or come back to that. But one of the topics that we were hoping to cover on the lightning talks was ESIP's collaborative infrastructure in this time. And Erin has been working really hard to kind of take it to the next step and build it up, especially getting ready for the fully virtual ESIP meetings that are coming up. So we thought we'd take this opportunity to hear from Erin and the folks that are helping to kind of take this stuff to the next level. We've got Hecht from WikiWorks, who's working on the ESIP Wiki update, Lucas Cioffi from QiqoChat, who's the lead developer for the application that's going to be used for virtual ESIP meetings, and Sheila, I believe Rabun, I don't know exactly how to pronounce that, that's the ORCID US community specialist for ORCID, the ORCID kind of API and ORCID system. So we're going to hear talks from the three of them briefly. Erin's got a little bit of an introduction, and we should have time at the end for a little bit of a discussion. So I'm looking forward to hearing what these folks have for us, and I'll let you take it away, Erin. Thanks for being here.
Great. Thanks so much, Dave, and thanks everybody for attending and for your interest. So just to jump right in, I think that all of you are probably familiar with ESIP. ESIP is a community organization that brings together about 150 different data partner organizations across academic and industry, and we really focus on facilitating connections at this human layer with collaborative infrastructure, both virtually and in person. So a lot of what ESIP has always done has been virtual through the work of collaboration areas like this one, meeting monthly, and also working asynchronously in between. So we've had a lot of experimental collaborative infrastructure over the last 20 years, and we've had some pieces that have sustained over time, but we've known for quite some time that we needed to be working on improving our collaborative infrastructure and really bringing it up to speed. And so really here, I just want to re-emphasize that what we do at ESIP is connecting people and organizations through these tools, and we don't provide cyber infrastructure or provide data or develop standards. That we work with partnering organizations that do those kinds of activities. And so we believe that by connecting people, that you all come to consensus and to agreement, and then go back to your home institutions and actually move down this interoperability stack. So agreements made up here at ESIP end up coming back to institutions and improving interoperability overall. So really, when we're talking about our collaborative infrastructure, I just want you all to remember that that's where we sit. This is a view of a letter that I wrote to the community right after our board meeting in April, where we decided to take the next two ESIP in-person meetings virtual. And what I wanted to point out here really is this last paragraph, that we would be investing in robust collaborative infrastructure. And I think while the funding has been there for some time to actually invest in the infrastructure, having this time where none of us are traveling has really given us the opportunity to think about what's useful for the community and what we really need. And so I'm excited to have all three of these talks today, share a little bit about the directions that we're going with ESIP's collaborative infrastructure. And I also want to take this moment to thank the board for their vision and their strategic leadership. And as we pivot, not pivoting just to a straight set of webinars and letting it be kind of boring, but keeping us sort of on the cutting edge of leading in this virtual collaboration space. So we're taking three approaches. As Dave mentioned, we are updating our Mediawiki website. We are using QiqoChat and Zoom for synchronous meetings of our virtual conference that's going to happen in July, and I suspect that we may also use this moving forward for collaboration areas. And then We are working with ORCID, and we became an ORCID member at the beginning of this month through the US consortium that's managed by Lyrasis, really partly for the login authentication piece of it so that we can have a single sign-on across our platforms, but also because ORCID allows us to have a single profile. So we don't really want people to continue to have many profiles. And all of this update is to facilitate synchronous and asynchronous collaboration, to continue to lower the barrier to collaboration across ESIP, the ESIP community. And one of the terms that I've been using a lot lately is to allow our community to have agency over how and when they collaborate. And these tools allow us to do that, and also to build on existing platforms. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Hecht to talk about what we're doing with the wiki. And Megan will give you control of the screen.
All right, how does that look?
Looks great.
Okay, great. So my name is Hecht. I'm the lead project manager at WikiWorks. And WikiWorks, pretty much all we do is Mediawiki consulting. So that's what we do. We've been doing it for quite some time. Mediawiki is an excellent tool for exactly what you're trying to do with it, collaborative infrastructure. But it is an open source tool, not a commercial product. And therefore, it's always good to have a professional specializing in Mediawiki helping you out, making sure that everything is being done properly with best practices. So one of the main things we've been brought on to is the Mediawiki upgrade from version 1.19 to 1.34. That's an 8-year version upgrade, so it's a very significant and difficult upgrade. And as well as expanding some of the collaborative features, which are even more important to make sure that collaboration works and is easy to use. A little bit about WikiWorks. It's been around since 2009. It was founded by Erin, who's a very well-known developer and I guess visionary in the Mediawiki community. He's written a book, which if you're using the wiki, I recommend getting. It's called Working with Mediawiki, and it's also available online for free. And also hosts a podcast called Between the Brackets, which is excellent, and where he interviews different Mediawiki developers. It's always very interesting. About me, I come from a software engineering background. I started off as a programmer, and I started working with Mediawiki since 2006, joined WikiWorks in 2009 as a developer, and right now I'm the lead project manager, and that's been going on for years. As a developer, I've written many, many extensions. You may be able to read some of them. There are 30 listed that are publicly available, a number of custom skins, lots of things to do with Mediawiki, some more useful than others. I do things because people pay me to do them, not necessarily because I think it's a good idea. But I've been around for a long time, and I've done a lot of stuff with Mediawiki, and right now I'm leading the team at WikiWorks, which is working on the ESIP Wiki. One of the main things we're working on is improving the look. This current wiki is using the vector skin, which is still in use by Wikipedia, but a little bit old. That's on the left side of the screen. And on the right side of the screen, you can see we've been at work for about a week, and we've already made a lot of progress on the upgrade. So the right side of your screen is a screenshot from the development wiki, and you can see it's already looking a lot more modern. If you're familiar with Wikipedia, you'll take a look at it and say, hey, that doesn't really look like Mediawiki, but it is. And you can see some of the icons a little bit more accessible, and it definitely looks more modern. And we haven't actually really touched the skin. All we did is install it. But there's many more things we can do as far as the look and feel and actually modifying some of the content. If you're familiar with some of the technical aspects, this skin is built on Bootstrap, which is responsive, which means that it's got mobile support out of the box. If you look at mobile support right now, if you try to open the ESIP Wiki on your phone, you'll see something like what you see on the left side of your screen. And either you won't be able to read the content or you won't be able to read the navigation. This is not ideal. Since we're using a responsive skin right out of the box, you'll get something like on the right side of the screen. You'll notice the navigation has been collapsed into what we call a hamburger menu. If you were to click that, you would see the navigation, but we don't want it to take up any real estate on a very precious real estate screen, which is very small. So by default, it's collapsed. You click it, you get to see the navigation, and there are a number of other mobile improvements in here as well, and it's very readable. So as I mentioned, we're jumping in 8 years in Mediawiki. I'm not going to be able to cover all of the features that have been added in the interim, but you can see we have a new VPS, which should be much more secure, much quicker, and following some of the optimizations needed for a good Mediawiki setup. You can see we've already, what you're seeing on the right side of the screen is already installed on the new VPS. And we've got Mediawiki installed, newer version of PHP, MariaDB, which is a drop-in replacement for MySQL, Elasticsearch, which we'll talk about, and the entry point URLs, we've implemented some best practices, so the URLs will be much shorter, much easier to use, and they'll look much nicer. Some of the new Mediawiki features, as I said, we can't really cover them, but here's a sample. You can see the recent changes. On the left side is the current recent changes on the ESIP Wiki. On the right side is what we have on the development VPS. And you can see I highlighted, instead of having to kind of find some links in the recent changes options, there's a little drop down you can click, and you can decide how many results you want to show, which time period you want to search. And also you'll notice that in the main content area in the list, the changes have been kind of combined. So instead of having a bunch of changes by the same person, if it's the same person making a bunch of changes, it'll combine them into one that you can expand if you'd like. One of the things we've done is an improved search engine. It's powered by Elasticsearch, which is a very popular and powerful search engine. I give you one example of what the improvements are. On the left side, you'll see somebody who tried to search for science, ironically, misspelled it. And of course, the wiki has no idea what that is. Now, we don't really want our computers anymore to be as smart as we are. We don't want it to do what we tell it to do. We want it to figure out what we want it to do. Therefore, Elasticsearch will try and figure out what are you really trying to search for. And we're all familiar with that from using Google. So on the right side, you'll see the Elasticsearch results from the development wiki. And in this case, it knows you really intended to search for science, and it shows you some science results. It's just one example of many. One of the things we noticed when we were analyzing current usage of the ESIP Wiki were these collab areas. And of course, we're focusing on collaboration. So we zeroed in on that as a great place to start improving things. So one of our specialties is developing structured data, semantic technologies, and making sure that data talks to each other, is laid out in a user-friendly way, and that the wiki can actually understand what the data is and be able to present it in a way that's intelligent. So you can see I have two collab areas that I sort of picked at random. And what you'll notice is that there are a lot of similarities, but yet a bunch of differences. So they both have events and activities, but on the left side, you'll see it's in one. On the right side, you'll see it's just activities and it's in a different spot. Instead of being green and a blue, you'll see they both have get involved, but they're in different spaces. And they both have resources, but also in different spaces. So we realized that a lot of these collab areas, they have a lot of things in common. And what we can do is we can create a data structure to enforce that they're being used in an intelligent way and being presented in an intelligent way. And that allows us to actually really, really improve the user data entry experience. And we'll see one example of that. But we'll have form-based entry instead of having to look at some wiki code, which I'll show you in a minute. It's not very user-friendly. You'll be able to enter the same data, but using a form. And since it's being put into a form, we can use things like autocomplete, or maybe like a little calendar plugin where you can choose a date instead of typing it in. And then once we have structure, we can enforce a certain layout. So we'll make sure that all of the collab areas, they all have access to the same features, and they all look similar. So if you're used to looking at a certain collab area, you want to look at a different one, it'll look the same. You'll intuitively know how to navigate that collab area and what it can do for you. So here's an example. If somebody was looking at the main page right now and decided the welcome to the ESIP Wiki on the top line really, really needs an exclamation point after that to convey the excitement of the ESIP Wiki, and you want to add the exclamation point. So you would click edit and you would get this. If that looks like something you'd want to touch, then I have a job for you. We're looking for good developers. But most people don't really want to deal with this at all, and it scares people away. And it doesn't encourage people to contribute to a wiki, which really, we need everybody on board. It's a collaborative tool. We want as many people as possible to be able to contribute in the best ways possible. So what we did is we installed the WYSIWYG editor, which is something people are familiar with something like Microsoft Word. This might look a little bit better. And if you wanted to add that exclamation point, you see exactly where to put it, and there's a helpful toolbar. You don't have to know wiki code at all. You can just edit just like you would edit in any word processor. There's a helpful dialog for adding links. There's a number of other ones. Lots of many improvements over the standard wiki editing, and this is already installed and working on the development wiki. And that's about it. I'll stick around for the comments and questions later. If you'd like to reach out to me, that's my email address right there, ikehecht@wikiworks.com. And I look forward to hearing what everyone has to say. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Ike. I mean, gosh, watching this is just, I'm ecstatic seeing the wiki improvements, and I've been getting emails from Ike, and the staff has been getting emails over the last couple of days, and we've been seeing these improvements, and it's just, I can't wait to dive in. We do have a minute for anybody who's got a quick question for Ike before we move on to Lucas. Any quick questions? Ted, you can ask a question. Ted Haberman is in my office. Ted, go ahead.
Thanks very much for showing some of these things. In terms of the structured data, that's something that I've always been interested in Wikiland. And are you building that directly sort of on top of the Semantic Wiki extension?
Yes, Semantic Mediawiki, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Cool. Thanks, Ike. I think we should come back to that structured data topic and when we have time for more discussion at the end of this call. So next up, I'd like to introduce Lucas Cioffi from QiqoChat. And Lucas, I'll let you take it away and just tell me next slide.
Thanks very much, Erin, and thank you to ESIP for this opportunity. What's exciting here is how we work great with a knowledge repository such as Mediawiki. That's where an institution is going to store all its knowledge, and a place like QiqoChat is meant for interactive events where an organization can actually create new knowledge by bringing people together, posing tough questions, letting them work through them, both over video chat, whether that's Zoom, GoToMeeting, Microsoft Teams, or with written tools like Google Docs and forms and wikis and asynchronous conversations. So QiqoChat is arranged in this idea of groups. We call them circles. So here we see the ESIP circle on QiqoChat, and that is a place for a group to collaborate. And a circle has a set of shared tools. We also have a bunch of subcircles and ESIP subcircles. We have one here about the ESIP summer meeting. So next slide, please. We'll go take a look at the circle for the ESIP summer meeting. This is a collaboration space for the people who will be attending that event. Next slide, please. Here is the event inside the circle. So this is the event where people will click the big green button to participate. We can automatically RSVP them when they register through Eventbrite or Cvent, and then we'll click next slide, and then you'll see the event space. So QiqoChat is the glue between the documents you see on the right-hand side, whether those are embedded wiki pages or embedded Google documents or embedded Post-its. And then at the top left, you see joined video for plenary. So when you click that, it's going to launch a large-scale, best-in-class tool such as Zoom or GoToMeeting or Microsoft Teams or Adobe Connect or Google Meet. On the left-hand side, you'll see a bunch of breakout rooms. And the key with QiqoChat is that we give people the ability to move themselves from workshop to workshop, from seminar to seminar, into the parallel breakout rooms. That helps them take responsibility for their own learning in the event and their own contributions. You can have people giving presentations, or you can have people hosting conversations. We support either format. So on the right-hand side, in this kind of the center, you see a big blue announcements button. So you might arrive on the main room here, the plenary, and you'll see some announcements. It is completely customizable, and what you see here is built by the ESIP team. They put in the photo that they want to set the tone at the top left, and on the right-hand side, here are some announcements. If we go to the next slide, we're just going to be clicking across the top. Now we're into the agenda, and you could, if this was the live page, you could scroll down, you'd be able to see all of the, and we can go down, we'll see the code of conduct next. So you can embed any documents that help set the tone. And we'll go next slide, please. And you can even have an embedded Google document here. So this is where I think of it as the churn. It's the churn of the conversation. People can deposit notes on the fly, and then you package it, you wrap it up, you put it in a place like Mediawiki for longer term curation and institutional knowledge. So our role here with Kiko is to take the verbal conversations, to give people space to just quickly jot them down, up to 75 people editing this Google Doc at the same time. And then when it's done, store it on the wiki so that that knowledge is not lost. We can go to the next slide, please. Here we enter into one of the breakout rooms. So we would just click one of the breakout rooms on the left, and then the tool that you're using on the right is going to change. This is Etherpad. It's an open source tool for many people to be able to edit the same document at the same time. The photo on the left is chosen by the ESIP team to give people a sense that, all right, this might be a familiar conference space, puts people in the mindset of what they would normally be doing in person. Next slide, please. Here's another group that's using QiqoChat to show some of the other things that you can do. So this is a theater company in the UK using QiqoChat to gather people across London's theater district to talk about the future of theater. They have a crisis because their economics depend on people coming together in large numbers to enjoy a show, but that's just not possible or desired at the moment. So they use QiqoChat with just a 2-week launch. They held 4 events, brought together about 800 people across those 4 events, and they had a 250-person waiting list. When they came with a compelling question about a present crisis that their members were facing, people came and showed up. I chose this slide in particular because on the right, they use an interesting tool that is somewhat scientific in that it visualizes data about who's in the room. It might be a little bit hard to see, but it's somewhat of a histogram where people move a dot to represent themselves. So if they're an artist, they put a dot on the first row. If they're a writer, they put a dot on the second row, and you can sort of see who is in the room. And when you facilitate online events, doing things like this, that's helpful because it helps people get a sense of whom they're speaking with, and that helps them adjust, and it helps them feel more comfortable because they're missing some of the social cues that they would normally see when they're sitting in a room and looking around. Okay, next slide, please. Here's an example from that same group, that theater company in London, where they're embedding things like Post-its, just to show that you can embed many, many tools on the internet into that space on the right-hand side. So it's just meant to be completely configurable so that you can design the best experience for your participants. Next slide, please. Here's another tool on Kiko that's more social and less collaborative. It's an always-on space for your group to drop into at any point. Think of it as the water cooler or the cafe, cafeteria, the coffee shop down the street. You could take a stroll in here. If it's a high traffic time, you'll find other people from your community, and you will be able to talk about any topic that you want. So it's a space for completely unscheduled conversations. It's always on, and it's just for your group. You can customize the photos in the background. And the next slide, please, will show an example of, here's another background photo, and this is what it looks like on the left-hand side. You could see which people are in which room, what topics they're discussing, and who is on video. When you're on video, you get that red dot next to your profile icon. Next slide, please. And just another fun photo to show it's completely customizable, this idea of, we call them the gardens, and you can call it whatever you like and rename all your rooms. The goal here is to facilitate those impromptu conversations where you need to speak to someone now. You don't know who's available, but you know where to go. You walk down the street to the park or to the cafeteria in your agency's building, and you see your friend there and you can have that quick impromptu conversation. It's meant for transfer of knowledge in the way that's so important, interdisciplinary and across departments, but doesn't happen when we're all quarantined at home. Okay, and we have 2 more slides. Just the next one's another picture of the gardens to just kind of get a feel that might be more relevant. And then the final slide will be my contact information for anybody that has additional questions. We have the president of Croatia coming on Monday, the vice president of the European Union coming on a week and a half after that. We're excited about scientific organizations that are using QiqoChat to have these deeply technical discussions where they want each one of their breakout spaces to be prepared so that when the people come in, they have all the tools they need right at their fingertips, and you don't have to share links through Zoom to try to catch up to where everyone is. And then after the meeting is over, all of those links are still there, those knowledge objects. People can go back to them, and then they can be transferred into Mediawiki. And it's great to be on the call with ORCID. We're doing an integration with ORCID's API so that people can sign into ORCID and then have access to QiqoChat. I look forward to your questions now or at the end. Thanks very much for your time.
Thanks so much, Lucas. And you guys are doing a great job of sticking to time. We do have, if there's a specific question for Lucas, a quick question, we have time for that. For me, it's really exciting to have all 3 of you on the call because of how connected each of these things is to each other. Ted has a question.
Hey, Lucas, nice presentation. I'm curious, I was thinking, talking to Erin about, as she's building these, the setup for the meeting, is there an API to QiqoChat that we can use to set tabs or, various, setup situations for a set of rooms or an event?
Others have asked for that. Currently, the API is based around creating users, and then you can white label Kiko by embedding it into your website. And through the iframe, you're determining which user that signed into your website you want to be the current user on Kiko. So you handle all the authentication, they sign into your website. When they come to your page where you're displaying QiqoChat, we are displaying the correct user that you've already created in our database through the API.
But there's no way to set tab names or room names or anything like that with an API.
The way that we set, you can do it through Google Sheets. We have a template where you can manage, you might have 5 different tabs across the top of breakout room 2, breakout room 3, breakout room. So it's a lot of documents to manage. You can store it in a Google Sheet, copy and paste that in just 5 seconds into QiqoChat, and it updates all the rooms instantly. Others have been asking about an API for this sort of thing. I think that it's a place that we would love to expand. So maybe as we continue collaborating with ESIP, we see what would be most convenient for you. I'd love to consider it, absolutely.
Cool.
Thanks.
Thanks, Lucas. Okay, our 3rd presentation is from Sheila from the US ORCID Consortium, and I think we're just getting Sheila's slides up. And Sheila, tell us how to pronounce your last name first.
It's Rabun.
Rabun.
Which I've gotten weird pronunciations my entire life, so it is totally fine. But yes, I'm Sheila Rabun. I am the ORCID US Community Specialist at Lyrasis. So for those who may not know, Lyrasis is a member organization traditionally for libraries, archives, and museums. And over time, we've expanded more into the overarching research and scholarly communication landscape. So we are the administrative home for the ORCID US Community Consortium, which is a group of 141 currently nonprofit organizations in the US that are ORCID members. So I'm here to talk to you all today about the ORCID API and authentication process. So I think everybody here is familiar with ORCID, but just as a recap to make sure we're all on the same page, ORCID stands for the Open Researcher and Contributor Identifier. What you're seeing on the screen is my ORCID ID. So ORCID IDs are free to anyone and is a unique number that distinguishes you from other people. ORCID IDs link to an ORCID record where data can be stored about individuals, similar to what you would see on a CV or resume type of thing. So you can think of ORCID as kind of a next generation CV. Rather than keeping track of all of your affiliations and activities in a static Word document, like I think many people have been doing, you can keep track of all this information in your ORCID record. The great thing about ORCID is that data within ORCID records is interoperable with systems that are integrated with the ORCID API. So rather than having to, create multiple profiles and retype information and fill out forms for different organizations over and over again, if your data is up to date in your ORCID record and the systems you're interacting with are integrated with the ORCID API, you can send your data directly to other systems without having to type it in again. So we have this idea of enter once in ORCID, reuse often in other systems. So this graphic kind of illustrates that interoperability aspect of ORCID. You have the researcher at the center with their ORCID ID, and then organizations that researchers are affiliated with, like publishers, funders, employers, so universities, research institutions, and other organizations like ESIP can connect with their affiliated researchers' ORCID IDs in order to read information from ORCID records and also write information to ORCID records, and that's made possible through the ORCID API. So with the ORCID API, with integrations, you can, a system can get someone's authenticated ORCID ID. So rather than having people type in their 16-digit ORCID number, with that, there's a lot of room for error. If you accidentally type in the wrong number, then it's completely wrong. So the API allows for getting an authenticated ORCID ID. You can log into other systems with your ORCID credentials. And also the API allows for reading data from the ORCID record and writing data to the ORCID record. So I'm going to talk mostly about the authentication process with ORCID, which is what the API is based on. So the ORCID API is based on OAuth 2.0. So that basically means that individuals must actually grant permission in order for organizations to interact with their ORCID ID and their ORCID record. And that permission is granted by having the individuals go through an authentication process. If you're not already familiar with OAuth, you probably have seen it before online when you go to, say, sign into some platform using either your Facebook or Google credentials. So it's kind of allowing logging into a third-party system using a different set of credentials. So with ORCID, that would look something like this, and many of you are probably familiar with this kind of screen. You've probably seen this option to log in using ORCID on other platforms that you have interacted with. So from the perspective of a user, when we click on this button to log in using ORCID, basically that takes you to the ORCID login screen where you would enter your information to sign into your ORCID record. If you don't already have an ORCID ID, you can click on the Register Now link and create one right then and there. From there, a screen pops up that looks something like this. This is an example from a grant system called Proposal Central. But this is the ORCID authorization screen. And basically, this is where the platform that we're logging into is asking for permission, in this case, to get the ORCID ID. That's the most basic level of authorization that can be granted. So as the end user, we will click authorize on that slide, that blue button down there. So on that example, we're just asking to get that authenticated ORCID ID number, but there also are some other possibilities for what, as an organization, you can ask the user for. You can ask the user to be able to read any data on the ORCID record that's set to limited access, so any trusted parties only data on the ORCID record. You can also ask to write data to ORCID. With the ORCID member API, you can also enable automatic updates if you want, so that your system can be notified anytime changes are made to individuals' ORCID records. So those permissions, basically they're called scopes. This is just a quick screenshot of the different scopes that are available. So these are basically the different permissions that can be used within an ORCID API integration, depending on what the organization wants to do with their affiliated researchers' ORCID IDs and records. So as an additional example, you'll see in this authorization screen, we're being asked for permission to add or update research activities and also read that limited access information. So just a little quick behind the scenes look at what's going on here. Basically, this is all set up using an authorization URL where a client ID for your API integration is present in this URL, as well as the scopes or permissions that you want to ask researchers for. So whatever that button that we clicked on earlier to log in using ORCID, this is the URL that's behind that button, and we'll include the scopes there that we want to use to ask our researchers for permission. So back to our example, once we click authorize, regardless of what permissions are being asked, the system that is integrated with the ORCID API will receive back a handful of data that would need to be stored in some sort of secure database on the back end of the system. That data includes the person's name, their authenticated ORCID ID number, the scopes that were used and approved and authorized by the person, and an access token. So for the purposes of just logging in with ORCID, you wouldn't necessarily need the access token, but if in the future you wanted your system to be able to read data from ORCID or write data to ORCID, you would use this access token to do that. And just another note, by default, once somebody does sign in using ORCID and authorize that connection, those permissions by default remain in place for 20 years unless the individual revokes that or unless the organization revokes that. And that can be something helpful just in case you maybe want to keep up with researchers. Maybe they've been involved in a project and then they've moved on to do something else. You can kind of see where those people have gone if you want to do that. Just a little bit of information about the API. It is a REST API, so it uses HTTPS calls to request and send and receive data. Of course, this would be set up and configured within each system using the programming language that system uses. There are some, you can use the command line to interact with the ORCID API, and also Google OAuth Playground is a good web-based tool if you want to experiment with the ORCID API. That is definitely possible. And just to wrap up, going just a little bit beyond the login with ORCID, this is just an example of a command. If you wanted to read data from ORCID, you're seeing that the access token, the ORCID ID, and then the section of the ORCID record that you want to read is present there. If you want to write data to ORCID, it's basically the same thing. You just need to point to either a JSON or XML file that has the data that you want to write to ORCID. So for example, I know that ESIP does mini grants. So if you wanted to write that grant information to those recipients' ORCID records, you could do that as well. ORCID does have a lot of documentation available and tutorials online about the API. I'm really just skimming the surface here, so feel free to explore further. And Oh, just one last note. Now that ESIP is part of the ORCID US Community Consortium, I am the dedicated support person for any of your ORCID questions and needs. So do not hesitate to contact me for anything that you might need. And that concludes my presentation. We're also on Twitter, so feel free to follow us there.
Thank you so much, Sheila. So before we go into a full discussion on the collaborative infrastructure, I just want to open it up to the group. Any questions for Sheila on ORCID or our participation in ORCID?
Sheila, this is Lucas. Are there some systems that you would love to see integrated at the API level that for whatever reason are just not yet integrated? Those organizations haven't done so?
Yes, there are a lot of systems. The first one that's coming to mind is LinkedIn. It would make a lot of sense to have LinkedIn connected with ORCID, because that would allow somebody who already has a LinkedIn profile to send all that information automatically to their ORCID record. Or if somebody's just getting started with LinkedIn, they could send all their data from ORCID, and that would avoid a lot of retyping. Google Scholar would also be great. We actually have approached them, but they don't seem interested at this time. There are some workarounds though for getting data between Google Scholar and ORCID. Aside from that, I do work with a lot of universities, especially university libraries. So there are a number of repository systems and other types of systems that universities are using that we would love to see integrated as well. So there's still, there's a long way to go before we reach the ideal scenario of all of the different systems in the research and scholarly communication ecosystem integrated with ORCID, but things are moving in the right direction.
That was a really good question, Lucas, and interesting answer, Sheila. Other questions for Sheila? Rich, I see that you're unmuted.
Well, so the main use of this in the like in the summer meeting would be to just have a single login for, is that right?
Yeah, so that's where we're going with it. And I'm not even sure we'll be 100% ready for the summer meeting to have a single login, but yeah, we're moving away from our homegrown single login to an ORCID login. And we really, I guess some of you know that we got GoToMeeting bombed a couple of months ago, right at sort of the beginning of the quarantine. And one of the things I was thinking about is how do we keep ESIP as open as possible, but at some points have some security measures in place. And I feel like everyone should have an ORCID, and so anyone with an ORCID would be able to log into ESIP areas, but it would give us that authentication step.
And I think another thing we found, we started out on this Pangeo project with GitHub authentication, but there's something really nice about this. We switched over to ORCID, and it gives people kind of like a feeling of like confidence and sort of, or you know what I mean, like and familiarity. That's actually pretty nice. It's just one of those little things that helps to build, like make people feel comfortable about the community.
Yeah, the other thing I like, and Sheila, maybe I just missed it, I stepped away for a minute, but the idea of having a profile with ORCID, at ORCID as a user being able to set set what I would like to share publicly, and then reuse that profile again and again at all sites that are using ORCID is something that's really attractive to me. So that's something that I hope that we get to with ESIP, that the parts of your ORCID profile are visible on the wiki, or potentially on QiqoChat.
Yeah, that was going to be my question.
Right. What was the question?
Sorry, you can go ahead and answer Erin's question.
Oh, I was just gonna chime in and say I did not cover the visibility settings within ORCID, but for everyone who does have an ORCID ID, you probably already know that you can decide what information you want to be public, private, or accessible to trusted parties only. And then in terms of, for example, populating data within your profile on QiqoChat or whatever, that data can be pulled in from ORCID, so you don't have to sit there and retype your profile information into yet another system. So that is also part of the API too.
I think it's great that you've got that push capability to push updates. So that's wonderful. And we'll definitely be taking advantage of that on QiqoChat.
Cool.
Awesome. Yeah, so I maybe missed it as well, but I was gonna see if there's already integrations in place for the kind of synchronization between Mediawiki and ORCID.
I'll answer that. We actually already have it working with Mediawiki. We just put it in today, and I tested it out myself. I created my own ORCID today, and it works great. And we'll just have to figure out some of the practical ways to switch everybody over.
That's so awesome.
That's great.
Yeah.
Hey, Dave, Ted has another question.
Is that Ted?
Yeah.
My voice has changed. I just wanted to put in a plug. We've been doing some work with organizational identifiers, RORs, in ESIP, and we had a Funding Friday project last year that started that. And so organizational identifiers and ORCIDs and then DOIs for data all sort of work together. During the summer meeting this year, we'll have a session. Sheila will be there to talk about ORCIDs, and then we'll have Res Cognito will be talking about using your ORCIDs, using people's ORCIDs for giving them credit for doing various kinds of things. Res Cognito is an interesting idea developed by a guy named Richard Wynn, who will be there, and then Danielle Lowenberg from CDL will be talking about making data count. And Res Cognito and Make Data Count are two interesting systems for taking advantage of all different kinds of identifiers, ORCIDs, DOIs, RORs, etc. So I'm just putting in a shameless plug for that session during the meeting in July.
Is anybody out there?
Yeah, are there any other questions, comments? I'm personally really looking forward to seeing how the QiqoChat thing works. We used it for a ESIP leadership committee meeting earlier this week, and it was nice to have everything integrated in one place the way it was, for sure. But when we have multiple rooms and everything, I think it's going to be next level. I'm excited to see it.
Excellent.
If there are no other, is there a question in the chat? I see some more chats here. Those are just
Megan put Res Cognito in the chat, and I just put our QiqoChat space in the chat. If you want to start poking around or exploring, I will say it's still we're working on it, but you're welcome to be there. I'm also leading a training right after this call. If you're curious about QiqoChat for the meeting and you're a breakout session lead, I would encourage you to attend that, or you're presenting in a breakout session.
We'll see you there, Erin.
Sounds good, Rich.
Well, so I was just gonna ask, like, how well have the QiqoChat conferences gone? Maybe it's not a fair question, but like how, so I guess where one of those questions is, my concern with virtual conferences is you're going to have some people that are fairly digitally native that are able to take part in a great way, but a lot of people are going to be in the background or in the, on but not present in a way that they would have been if they were there in person. And I'm just wondering if you have a sense for how well you've been able to get people engaged on the platform, and like I guess what's the approach to trying to get more people engaged on that platform that maybe wouldn't otherwise on a screen share?
So the surprising news that we heard from some of the organizers is that people expected to go to an online conference and be able to multitask and take care of other work. But it turns out if you have conversational discussions, they're not just webinar presentations, and if people have their video on, they're going to be quite present, and they'll be surprised how busy they were the entire day. The other surprising thing that is news to me as a man is that in the technical conversations that we had, one woman pointed out that normally when she goes to the in-person conferences, at these tech conferences, she has to yell to get her voice in there. And I was oblivious to that, not because I was one of the ones yelling and preventing her from getting in, it's just I wasn't going to her conferences. And she said when she met with the same people through Zoom and with Google Docs paired at the same time, there was no need to yell. It was everybody is, she said she just felt bigger because everybody had the same size box to talk through. And so it was just a more respectful experience. And there is something also about QiqoChat. We're a small company and the interface is not polished like GoToMeeting, but that actually triggers interesting behavior from participants where they feel like they're figuring it out along with each other as they go. And it creates a collaborative experience, especially if you have anyone that has an accessibility difficulty, such as not able to, they're either blind or cannot hear. When you start layering on the accessibility, people welcome that and it's not a burden. So that's what I'd add. It's that because our platform is just a bit rough, it ends up making people pay attention more. And because they're paired with Google Docs, where people are typing 500 pages of notes in a 3-day meeting among 300 people. And that's because we promote the notes right there so that you don't have to go digging for them. And then I think it's just it's a positive cycle where people see each other paying attention and they pay attention more too.
That's fascinating. Yeah, giving people something to focus on makes a lot of sense, and I like that.
The other thing that we're doing, Dave, to pair with QiqoChat, and I think that QiqoChat has really developed this amazing community of facilitators. And so we're working with 2 facilitators to help session leads and to help ESIP staff and my dog to build engagement on top of the tools. And so I think that QiqoChat and the wiki both give us a really good platform for working together. And then we have additional tools like silent note taking, or there's some very easy things. There's a set of practices called liberating structures, which give us a framework that we can then help to encourage more and different kinds of participation. So I think that's the other piece that we're pairing here. We're not just hoping that the technology is going to save the day, but we're doing a lot of work on top of that to make sure that the way that we're using it is a way that's going to actually encourage networking and try to recreate some of the stuff that we're missing from our in-person meetings. And I guess I would say maybe we've even gotten a little bit sloppy in our in-person meetings and just taken for granted some of the passive ways that we network, and being forced to be more literal in the virtual space, I think is going to lead to some interesting connections.
I like that. Yeah, good. Given that, I think probably a number of people on right now are going to be running sessions. Personally, I guess I'm looking forward to using these tools to not just make space for people, but to give people a platform. And I think this will be a way to give us a checklist, essentially, that makes sure we give people opportunities to take part, which is really good. But sorry, Rich, go ahead.
No, well, I hope I didn't zone out while this was being discussed or something, but does this have like sort of Slido kind of like capabilities where you can vote questions up so you can see kind of what, the community thinks are good questions to discuss?
Join
Yes,
me
Rich.
in the session.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Yes.
Yes, Rich, and you can even embed Slido right into your breakout room.
Okay. Cool.
I'll see you on Friday, Erin.
Great.
Tomorrow. Wow, this week went by.
It did.
All right, any last things? We're up against the end of our session here. Well, thanks a lot, everybody. This was a different take on what we usually do in these sessions, but I think this was really good. And yeah, just for everybody who's on, this is recorded. It should go up on YouTube. I guess we didn't clear that with all the speakers yet. Hopefully everybody's okay with that. So we'll share it around. It'll be on the wiki. Contact information and everything is on the wiki. And yeah, we'll be probably skipping next month because of the summer meeting. And I would imagine August will be something of a wrap-up session from the summer meeting, focusing on IT&I type topics. So that'll be the rest of the summer. Hope everybody's hanging in there and doing okay. And looking forward to seeing everybody on QiqoChat at the summer meeting. So
Thanks, Dave. And thanks, Ike,
yeah.
Lucas,
Dave.
and Sheila. This was really great.
Cool. Have a good
Thanks for
afternoon.
having me.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.